barely able to talk. He said he just was going to have to postpone his talk. And I had scheduled Dr. Phil Billings from Lebanon Valley College to speak to us in March, and I called and offered to buy him all the booze or all the ice cream he wanted to. If he could move his talk up. I don't know how many of you see the Lebanon Daily News, but they just did an article on Phil. He's an English professor at Lebanon Valley College and a poet, and he became quite interested in veterans, not just World War II, but Korea, Vietnam, and Iraq and Afghanistan. And he interviewed a number of these veterans, two of which are here tonight. One of them, which I didn't know he was a World War II vet, but those of you who follow Lebanon Valley College sports, I'm sure the name Rinso Marquette is a familiar one to you, and I was surprised to find out that Rinso was a crewman on the B-24 Liberator bombers and did 25 missions. 35 missions. And B-17.
Pretty dumb.
But anyway, Phil interviewed a total of 13 different veterans, and he wrote this book, When We Talk About War. And he's going to talk about some of these people, both, he did some of them in poetry and some of them in straight verse, but he's going to talk about the World War II men that he interviewed. And hopefully our two gentlemen that are here may add a few comments after he does his piece on their entry in his book. So without further ado, Dr. Phil Billings.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Pleasure being here. Do I need a microphone, or can you hear me?
You better put it on.
Thank you.
That's hard of hearing.
I've been talking all day, either at student conferences or in classes, so my voice may... Now, what do they say in the commercials? Can you hear me now? Well, this has been an amazing project for me the last 3 or 4 years, interviewing combat veterans in the Lebanon County area, and I have to admit I snuck over the border one time to interview a man in Leesport, which is technically Berks County, but he goes to the VA in Lebanon a lot, so I think we let it pass. My goal is simply, in this book, was simply to not have a political agenda or historical or anything else point to make, but simply to try to understand better for myself, and maybe through me I can help other people understand better what it is like to be in a war. What's it like for a human being to be in combat or up on the front lines in some capacity. There's one woman here who was a nurse in Vietnam, one young woman who was stationed until 2 weeks ago in Baghdad. The rest were all in combat in one way or another. I tried to get some variety, but the majority, or at least the half, were in the infantry, which of course is really up in the front line. 8 of the 13 poems are from World War II veterans, 2 from Korea, 2 from Vietnam, and the 1 from Iraq. The one from Iraq, I didn't try to make it into any sort of poetry. Time did not permit, and I thought it was very appropriate with this new sort of war we fight now that I was, instead of interviewing this person directly or even over the phone, which I had planned, our interview ended up being a series of emails. So the last thing in the book is some edited emails from this young woman. So the point of the book is not some historical or chronological tracing of war through the 20th century. I mix these wars all up. The more I listened to the people I interviewed, the more it seemed to me that war was war, no matter when, no matter where. And so the different wars are all mixed up in time. So I could put people who had other things in common next to each other, or really different contrasts next to each other, that sort of thing. I listened to the tapes of each of these 90-minute interviews over and over again. I made a lot of notes on those tapes. From those notes and those tapes, I started trying to hear, where is the poem? Where is the story? Where are the words that are best expressing what this person went through in combat, what this personality is, and how they felt about it afterwards. So I did a lot of cutting. First of all, you have to cut most of a 90-minute interview. And then I did a lot of summarizing, paraphrasing, rearranging. And I have to admit, a few times I just made things up, which I hope went perfectly with what they did say, make it a better poem. So out of this kind of process, 13 or at least 12 times came this book of mine called When We Talk About War. I think when we talk about war, we better know what we're talking about. And this is my attempt to aid in that education for all of us. I don't need to tell you folks. A lot of you folks, what it's like to be in a war, you need to tell me. But at least these were some people who told me, and through me, I hope they could tell a lot of others. I thought maybe I'd give you an idea of what one or maybe two of these tapes sounds like, and what the raw material was that I worked with. Here's one of a little part, the first, right near the beginning of an interview with a man from Steelstown, North Anvil Township. Not Belgrove. He didn't want to be called Belgrove. He's almost a mile and a half from Belgrove, so he didn't want to be tarred with that brush. Norman Winters. Not the more famous Winters in Hershey, but a man named Norman Winters. Here's the first thing that happened in this interview is he was waiting there for me with a map, a big map of his unit's progress through France in 1944 and 45. He had been a mortar man, and I found out, beginning with this map, how precise, how location map oriented he was. He had to be to do his job. And so I tried to tailor the poem along those lines. I tried to capture that sense of precision and exactness in the poem. So I'll let you hear a little bit of Mr. Norman Winters speaking. I hope this can be picked up with the mic.
Goal to make the breakthrough.
So when you guys are still stuck.
Can anyone hear that? Can you hear that?
Yeah, they were inching forward.
Say a new breakthrough.
I'm
Pointing the map.
Well, that was at Paratime. And that's an area there where the 101st Airborne was also in that area. They were on D-Day, they were in this area here. And but then later on they were over in this area. That was one of our major battles there.
When you got there, they were still inching up on the same field.
Yeah, they were just outside of St. Louis. They called it the St. Louis breakthrough then. That's when the bombers came in and bombed the daylights out of the Germans. And in fact, they also did some of our infantry that were stationed in that area there because of the wind changing. Took the smoke bombs, took it back over our troops and the Air Force. Went by what they were told. The communications came on later on then. They found out that they have to have better communications. But anyhow, some of the bombs landed on our infantry there.
They were told to bomb, they lost both that. What kind of crossing did you have? Like, well, you get the idea. Maybe I can do just the flip side for a minute. High-tech.
There's a volume control on that.
They've got the volume up as high as it'll go.
Let me see if I can just block that.
I did. Let me try again. Well, I'll work with that. You get the idea of this. Maybe you can't hear as well as I did. One of the challenges I had when I did this kind of poetry with these men and women, or in my first two books called Porches with citizens, some of the older citizens of Annville, he has a very thick Pennsylvania Dutch accent. I wanted to play the part where he talked about going into St. Louis, where he saw all the overturned vehicles. Should I put it that way in my poem? What do you think?
Yes.
Sure. Well, look at the laughs it got. You want people laughing at this poem? See, that's the kind of decision, that's one of the many kind of decisions you have to make. There's different levels of truth going on. One is the literal truth of his dialect and so forth. You have to kind of decide which truth you're going for, and sometimes you have to sacrifice some of the others, or else it will be a, for many people, Pennsylvania Dutch accent on a page is comedy. In fact, they associate it with the stereotype of the so-called dumb Dutchman. Mr. Winters is anything but dumb. So I decided not to do that, not to try to capture that at all. That's not the level of truth that I was interested in. So there are a number, the way you and I talk, we almost never say ing at the end of our ing words. We almost all say un. I was hustling to get here tonight. If I say you, if I write UN apostrophe at the end of every word like that, my speaker will look dumb. That's a convention of print. We would accept it more speaking, but on a printed page, it means something else, and I have to remember that. So, that and all sorts of other things, as I said, rearranging, paraphrasing, cutting, summarizing, happen, and I'll read a little bit of this poem that comes from that part of the interview. Can't do two things at once. You observe the enemy location. You meet resistance. Directly or by walkie-talkie, you give the radio man coordinates to call to the battery executive officer and back. He's got 6 artillery guns that are loaded with 6 rounds each. One guy shoots a round. When it hits, you can tell how well he used his aiming sticks and kept his aim dead center. The next thing I'm going to read is the title of this poem. This stuff doesn't leave you. All you went through in World War II. After I got back here, I didn't talk about it with anybody, not even my wife or my sons when they grew up. Once a month, even now, I jump awake in the middle of the night with flashbacks. I see my buddies get killed again, and again, there's nothing I can do about it. 2.5 days after we arrived in France, Donovan Stout got killed. He was a good friend of mine since back in basic. It happened to be his turn up front and mine in the back battery that night when the Germans counterattacked, so I didn't see how he got it. After the engineers figured out how to put a kind of bulldozer blade on the tank so we could plow through those hedgerows, we started to make good time, maybe 30 miles a day. We took village after village, Caratan, Coutances, Avaranches, Rennes, and so forth. When you're moving fast like that, you don't have as many casualties. The Germans know you're coming, but they can't pinpoint you. They can't drop a mortar shell in your hip pocket the way they can when you're stopped dead. Out front most of the time, like I was, why didn't I get killed? Or at least badly wounded? For one thing, I learned to stay very alert. For another, I always carried in the left front pocket of my shirt a small testament with a steel front cover. It also contained the 91st Psalm. Part of it I had by heart. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but I shall not come nigh thee. One other thing kept me safe. Every week I got a letter from my sister, and it always ended with, "We love you, God bless you, we are praying for you." One day a lieutenant and I were riding back from the front when a shell exploded 8 feet in front of our Jeep, and somehow neither of us or the Jeep got even scratched. "Well, that's a miracle," he said. "No," I said, "that's the power of prayer." Here's how, although it wasn't the end of the interview, this is how what I made the end of the poem. You see, you hear me with the first two stanzas trying to sort of bracket the subject the way he talked about bracketing his target. The first one about back then, the next one about now. Here's how our tankers took a lot of prisoners. They're all spread out in formation. We call in round 1, round 2, then 3 and 4 and 5. Then we radio mission complete. And the tanks surge across the field, and right after round 6, they open up with machine guns, and they're right on top of the Boche, who are still hunkered down from the shelling. Soon white flags come up. There's still stuff that doesn't ever leave you, memories that still feel real. I'm up to 81 now, and they've never left me. Maybe I'm too emotional, I don't know. I figure I'm a male, so I shouldn't be this way. But for 10 straight months, every minute of every day would be your last. And there's nothing you can do about it. It was bitter cold all winter. We stood watch for 2-hour shifts at night, so we never got much sleep. But we got along pretty well, and you got extra energy when you knew you were helping to defeat someone so evil. What Hitler and his cohorts had planned for the human race, no human being should think that way. Like I said, I had 3 Jewish friends in the outfit, Abe Schipp and Ike and Herb Levy. They were right with us on the way to Gotha. But some local Germans told our tankers they should see something. So they swept right and we followed, and pretty soon we came to Ohrdorf. Look at these pictures I took. I got the camera from a German soldier. He didn't give it to me, I took it. This smoking pit is where they tried to cremate the bodies. Those are legs and arms and skulls sticking out. Here in this one, a pile of dead bodies spills out of the doorway. These bodies here, the Germans just stacked like wood, all of them nude and skinny like that with lime sprinkled over them. After Ohrdorf, we took very few prisoners. Later on, I realized how wrong that was. The soldiers we shot trying to surrender were mostly Polish guys that Hitler had defeated and drafted. They were as innocent as us. Here's a little bit from a man who was about 10 miles away from that, maybe 10 miles north on the line, named His name Harold Long. Harold was mortar man also. He didn't aim it. He was an aimer like Mr. Winters, but he was always had to go up front and spot the enemy and then go back and tell the people where to put their shells. What is the name for that? I'm not getting it right.
Forward observer.
Yeah, forward observer. The 44th started 3 months after D-Day at Louisville, France, September 1944. During the entire war, we had a total of maybe 500,000 just in infantry, rifles, and heavy weapons. The only ones entitled to wear the combat infantry badge. Well, maybe the division commander too. I guess he can wear whatever he wants. We fought with the 7th Army across Alsace-Lorraine and down through Germany, ended up in Austria where we met the 5th Army near Brenner Pass. I was a mortar man, a section sergeant in heavy weapons attached to G&E companies when they were on the offensive. We supported them, dug in around them, maybe 200 yards back of the line, and we did some protection, did have some protection. The riflemen, those guys are your real heroes. Wherever they dug in, that's as far out as the line went. The A Scout, that very first guy out there all by himself, that's your real hero. Then 200 yards behind him came the B Scout. The riflemen and the combat medics, I tip my hat to those guys. They're the ones that took it the worst. We had one medic for each platoon. They carried no weapons, but they still got shot at, killed. Those German shells coming in don't know which guys are carrying arms and which aren't. They land where they're going to land. It could be just one or two that come in, or it could be you're pinned down for hours, maybe all night. So much went on up and down that line, but with hundreds of miles, 1 million men involved, how could you know for sure exactly what? You could know what went on 100 yards to your right and to your left. That's all. Conflicts, blow-ups, confusion of all kinds, how could that not happen? You had many divisions, commanders, situations changing all the time. One night, somebody in our command really goofed. Keep spread out, they preached to us ever since Fort Lewis. When you're eating, sleeping, anything, keep an interval. But that evening in France somewhere, Ankenborg, maybe I think, all 3 battalions bunched up in one patch of woods and a shell came in, then another, you waited, then another, probably from just one German gun, then another. Shelling is so much worse in a forest. In an open field, the ground takes a lot of the explosion's force. The shrapnel goes up and out like a fountain. But in a forest, the shells hit tree limbs and trunks, so the shrapnel rains straight down on you. A big target just lying there. You can't dig in because of the roots. Every couple minutes that night, another shell came in, the moaning, the screaming, the yelling for medics all over again. This went on until morning. You were on your own in the pitch dark. You just had to stay there unprotected and take it. Hope it didn't, like with the guy beside you. Best officer I ever had and ever met was Captain Roman. He was a good-looking man, 28 or 29 maybe. He acted like a father to us. He knew his stuff. One day in late February of 45, we had to straighten out this little bulge in the line. Not the big bulge you always hear about, the one back around Christmas where the Germans surrounded Bastogne. That was just north of us. After that got straightened out, there were often little bulges like this one, all up and down the line when one of the units got stalled. If you didn't take care of those little bulges, some division's whole flank would get exposed. So this day we had to take a little farm, a chateau, I guess you'd call it, maybe 15 buildings. I guess it was made of brick or stone with a stone wall all around it. Weeks of shelling and it had caved in all the walls, but that just made the fortifications better. The Germans really had a defense set up there. G Company lost every officer that day but one. Captain Roman got hit in the morning. He could have been evacuated, but he said he wanted to get back to his boys. So the medics just patched him up. He was killed in the afternoon. He's talking about how he liked to be up front so he could see where the enemy was. He felt safer knowing what was going on. He had a better chance to win if you could see what was going on. That's how I am. I want to win. I'm a poor loser. In sports, no matter what kind, even in cards, I always play to win. If I can't win, I don't want to play. Maybe that's not always a good way to live. I know it's not. But that's how I am, and I carried that attitude over with me to war. Once in a while, I did get off the line and indulge a little bit with the local wine. Every tavern and every other cellar had some. But I had a responsibility to take care of. A few guys would get drunk whenever they found something, any houses they could get into, wherever. Then you had to babysit for them. That got me upset. See, you might have to move out at any time. It could be 2 in the morning. We're moving out. Time meant nothing. Now you'd have these drunks to wake up and drag along. Christmas Eve of 1944 in Sorgamine, something like that. Just about every building in the town had been shelled. Everything was real quiet. Then we heard organ music coming out of a chapel. Someone was playing Christmas songs. Ave Maria. It turned out to be our regimental commander, Captain Martin. Afterwards, some of us guys lay up in an attic, 8 or 10 of us feeling real homesick, thinking about what we'd be doing back home right now. Suddenly we heard one shot, one more, a German burp gun, then shells started coming in, and an hour later we moved up. See, when you're in the reserve, infantry puts you in the heaviest fighting. We took a little bit of a beating that night. Ever since then, when I hear Ave Maria, now I'd like to read parts of a couple poems of men who are sitting here in the front row this evening. I'll start with George Renzo Marquette. There's a remarkably handsome photograph of him here at the start of this poem, Bedroom Eyes. Whoa. I have photographs of each of these people in their uniforms, in their combat days, the beginning of each poem. I interviewed Renzo, what's it say here, July 3rd, 2003, July, last summer. No, a year ago last summer. And this kind of thing happened once in a while, that the tape would be over, but the interview went on. And Renzo and I talked all the way out to the car, and as I was getting in my car, he told me the very thing that I decided to use to organize the whole poem. That is that he was a radio man on a B-17, and he had to follow checklists endlessly all morning long, getting ready for the takeoff, equipment, bombs, everything. And then he told me he even went through a checklist of his own, a personal checklist. It was the only way he could make his body actually step onto that plane 35 times. So that's not on the tape, but that's what I decided to based the whole poem on like a checklist, a series of checklists. And this is how it begins. He was stationed, of course, in the eastern part of England. Our day began in the dark with a briefing. There was never a flight that you really wanted to go on. With one exception, I'll tell you about that soon. Never a flight that beforehand you took for granted. Each time you realized this one could be my last. This was especially true when the briefing indicated that you could expect some trouble, or when it said you'd return to an old target and you knew how bad the first time there had been. You'd seen a lot of planes shot out of the air by flak or fighters, and by December you'd seen 2 tremendous explosions, mid-air collisions during pre-dawn assembly. Later you would learn who had died. You knew it was real. You didn't feel fear exactly, but you felt anxiety. Covering all the topics one by one in the briefing helped to keep the anxiety under control. Targets, route, what you could possibly expect along the way, what they might hit us with on the bomb run, how many Afghan guns in the area, the possibility of having to deal with fighters, how far our own would accompany us, then where we'd be on our own, the amount of fuel, places in France or Belgium where we might be able to land if we ran short on a long flight to Berlin, say, or Czechoslovakia, or you ran into some kind of trouble, things like that. Each one covered deliberately, thoroughly, in order. Another cure for anxiety, or at least another way to keep it controlled, was the long checklist you went through to make sure all your equipment was functioning well. Then a radio man like me had to learn the new code for that day. On top of all this, every day I would stop and go through my own little checklist. Why do I have to fly this mission? I'd always start small. To save my family, to save my town, to save my state, to save my country, to save Europe, to save the world from Hitler. Then I could fly. None of us really wanted to go up in those planes except for that one time that started on Christmas of 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Our buddies on the ground in Belgium needed us, but the same blizzards that were making their lives hell were keeping us grounded. We're going today, we're gotta go today. We all said that, but for almost a week we couldn't go. For a week after that, whenever we tried to take off, some planes would go skidding off the runway, or ice on their wings would keep them from getting enough runway speed up to lift off. Gasoline leaks caused a few explosions, but the bombs didn't worry us. Their pins weren't pulled yet. Check. Here's the last part of the action on the plane that I put in the poem. On another Mersburg mission before we got there, they shot out my oxygen. I notified the pilot. We were short on walk-around bottles. Both we and the ground crew had made a mistake going down the pre-flight checklist. The ball turret and tail gunners had an oxygen tank in the waist of the plane for backup, but the radio man had none. The top turret gunner, C.K. Phelps, came down and got a bottle from the navigator and started back to me on the catwalk across the bomb bay. He was taking his life in his hands just to be out there on something so narrow and shaking, but he did it by grabbing onto the struts that held up the bombs. We were still above 20,000 feet. My mind was still clear. I removed my thick outer glove. Beneath it there was a silk one. When I reached for the bottle, it slipped from my hand and landed all the way down in the far right corner of the empty bomb bay. Impossible for either of us to reach. If we tried and fallen, our weight might have forced the doors open. I could see CK's eyes get even bigger. I could see the fright in them. I just sat down on the catwalk. I felt funny. I was scared, but I was ready to go peacefully. In my mind, I said my goodbyes to everyone. The next thing I see are Phelps' big eyes again. He's found another bottle and managed to get back to me and hook me up again and clip it on my jacket. The most beautiful things I've ever seen in the world are his eyes. I can find these places, I marked them, and I never find them, so I've got to go back to the table of contents every time, sorry. Malin Crum, the young man sitting here in the front row with his son, was plugged into that front in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge, or shortly thereafter, really in December, right? And was, in a sense, left out to dry by a road block and captured quickly by German soldiers, and was very lucky. There were 2 bullet holes through his helmet that it somehow missed his head. And a lot of the poem traces his trip from there on trains back through Germany to various prison camps, finally to the one where he was for over 3 months. I think I'll read part of this poem that's at the very beginning. He's not from northern Anvil, he's from Belgrove. He is from Belgrove. So he's a lot different from Norman Winters. But all of you who enjoy good Pennsylvania Dutch cooking will identify with this painfully or pleasantly, or both. March 30th, 1945. A big chuck roast right from the oven, with strips of fat all golden through it, and along one side meat and fat glistening. As your father starts to slice with the grain and juice puddles on the big plate beneath, cooked potatoes brown just right, roast potatoes sliced open and steaming, mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet potatoes, cooked carrots, cooked onions, all glistening and steaming, green beans and buttered corn and buttered rolls, angel food cake with chocolate icing, cherry pie, pecan, lemon, meringue, peach pies, each one fat and warm with brown crust that hold your mother's thumbprints all around. All of this in Grandma's big dishes and pans and on her white plates with the fancy blue edges. Thick slices of smoked ham, bowls of corn soup, bean soup with chunks of ham in it, potato soup so thick you were glad to wake up from dreams like this. You made yourself wake up because you could see and smell all that food, but you couldn't get it. That is when you are hungry. When you dream about food, you can say you're hungry, but you aren't really hungry until you can't get it. I lay there awake under the 3 jackets, trying to forget the dream, just feeling the usual itches and sores and emptiness. thinking how long it might be until we get breakfast. Some lice had made a nest again in the hair in the center of my chest. So I squeezed the nest between my thumb and finger and felt those tiny eggs pop. When the two guys packed in the bunk with me started scratching too, I made myself get up. The cold, as usual, made me wish that I hadn't. The barracks felt like 10, 15 degrees. Actually, it didn't feel quite as cold as it had a lot of other mornings for the past 2 or 3 months. Maybe I was just getting used to it finally. But spring had to be coming soon, didn't it? I took my jacket from on top of the other two guys and put it on and looked around. It was still dark, but I could see pretty good. Mike, Peter, a couple others were just standing around quietly like me, swinging their arms and lifting their knees a little to warm up, getting themselves ready to get through another day. I knew it would go like this. We'd drink a little bowl of barley soup for breakfast. We sit around, play cards, maybe a few guys talk about their families or where they grew up and such. Some of us try to get the guys up who just want to lay in their bunks all day and stare or sleep, dream of food, I suppose. Maybe for lunch we get some watery rutabaga soup. Before or after that, if the faucet has come on, we drink some water, then stand out in the courtyard a couple hours for supper. We get a couple pieces of hard black bread. After that, we just lay around in the barracks and talk a little bit about nothing, home, families, anything to keep you from falling asleep and dreaming of food. But finally you do. On this particular day, though, something very different happened. Not long after the card game began, we heard booms, explosions, not too far away, a couple miles at most. Mortar shells, cannon fire, 30 caliber rounds, not 32, 75s, not 88s. That meant American. I was scared every day over there, just like everybody else, but the minute I got captured, it never entered my mind that I wasn't going to get through it and make it home alive. But now, hearing that American fire and thinking it might happen soon, the past came flooding back to me. Suddenly I could remember how I had ended up in Ziegenheim, Stalag 9A, how I'd been tossed like a castaway from island to island until I finally washed up in this one. And then I backtrack and tell this story. I'd like to read one more little one. If I were reading the ends of several of these poems, you would be hearing many of these veterans talk about why it's been so hard for them to talk about this. What, if anything, finally got them. I don't think I was ever the first person they'd ever talked to about this in some form, but I think a lot of them told me things they'd never told anyone. And many of them said they had never talked to anyone about it until something relatively recently kind of made them. One man said he started getting flashbacks watching the Gulf War on television. Several said 9/11 brought back so many horrible memories that all the firemen and the innocent dead and so forth. Well, there were several who wouldn't talk to me, and as I said, I'm sure there were things these people didn't tell me, or still haven't told anyone. But one man was especially interesting. He was on Iwo Jima, and he told me that, and then he told me he had a letter that he'd written from a hospital ship there off the coast of Iwo Jima. He'd been on Iwo Jima a week and was injured and also was shaken mentally. So he said, I asked him if I could read the letter and could I use it in the book, and he said yes. So I read the letter, and it's just amazing. And I put it in sort of poetic form. I hardly changed the word. When I actually read it, or when one of his sons actually read it to him, he couldn't stand it. He himself had never read this letter he wrote in 1945. And he'd only let each of his sons and daughter read it once, and grandsons once, and that's all. So suddenly, he was explaining to me in his kitchen why I couldn't do this, he couldn't. His daughter was saying that too, this is just not going to be possible. So I went back and tried to make a poem out of what he was saying there at the kitchen table, and promised them not to use his name. And it seems to me to be a perfect statement for a whole lot of veterans who still cannot talk about it, who still can't allow themselves to relive what they went through. So this poem is entitled The Unknown Veteran. And instead of a photograph of the veteran, I have the same photograph that's on the cover of the magazine, some empty shells on a shelf. The Unknown Veteran. Best thing to do is keep it simple. All anyone needs to know is I fought in the 4th Marine Division. We were part of the first wave that landed on Iwo Jima, February 19th, 1945. A week later, they took me off the island. From the hospital ship, I wrote my wife a letter that tells the whole story. It was all fresh in my mind then. Everything that happened, all the things I saw happen. Terrible. Don't get me wrong, I'm not bragging. The Japs shot at everybody, and I'm one of the guys lucky enough to come out alive. The operation was supposed to take 5 days, but they were really ready for us. Years later, I let each of the kids read that letter one time. I still know where it is, but I could never read it again myself. The best thing to do is just keep it simple. Really, what else do people need to know? I was in the 4th Marine Division, which fought on Iwo Jima for 27 days. After that, the 4th Marine Division was no more. That's all I can say. Or for either of the 2 men here in the front row, Malin Crum or Renzo Marquez.
Renzo, how about just real simple, where you were and what unit, where you flew out?
I was in the 490th Bomb Group, stationed in England. This was a little town right there, but the memorial has been erected there, remembering 490th in UYE, and it was I don't know how many miles it was west of Cambridge, so it was in the below the wash of England, and we trained in Mount Lomita. We were the first group to use the airfield in Mount Lomita, and we trained in B-24s. And when we finished our training stretched out a little bit more than it ordinarily would have been, because we didn't have enough planes. We didn't have enough 24s. Well, finally, every crew had its own plane. We received our orders to go to England, and we flew our own individual planes across. Our route was from Mount Lomita to Lincoln, Nebraska, to West Palm Beach, down to Trinidad, into Fort Lake, Brazil, and across to Dakar, Africa, and up to Marrakesh, and then finally Marrakesh, Morocco, and then finally to England. It so happened that just within the last year or so, I learned from a fellow in England who attends our bomb group reunions that our crew was the first crew to land on the airbase in England, where we were stationed and for the duration. It so happened that I am the only living member of our original 10-man crew. All of the other 9, we lost our tail gunner. It's referred to in the book, in the poem. We lost our tail gunner on a mission. He was killed by flak. And our navigator, who had been asked to fly a mission with another crew at a time when our crew wasn't flying, was shot down and was a prisoner of war for a period of time, and then only got back. And he died in the early 60s. And the last one of our group, the last one to die was our pilot, a fellow named George Reeves, who was a truly great pilot. And there were some missions that we thought we'd never get back, but he just babied that ship back and got us there. So one other thing I just wanted to mention was that when Jackson referred to being B-24s, he was correct. We trained and went across in B-24s. And we flew our first mission several days before D-Day. I forget the exact, I think it was June 3rd, but the target was submarine pens in Brest. And the next day, our crew wasn't flying, and it was probably the nicest day that we had all the time we were in England. And we got together a softball game. And during the course of the softball game, I was playing third base, and I chased a foul ball. And I was running towards hedges over here, and I tried to stop in a hurry. My foot dug into an indentation in the ground, flipped me over. I had a compound fracture of the ankle, and I missed the next 6 weeks of flying with my crew. By the time I was cleared medically to return to the crew, we had transitioned into B-17s. And so therefore, I still have that old flight jacket in the closet at home that, for those of you who were in the Air Force, know that we used to paint our planes on the back of our jackets and then give the number of bomb missions, put a bomb for each mission. And so here's this B-24 with a great big bomb, because there's only one, and B-17 with 34 bombs. So anyway, it was I was privileged to be with an outstanding group of men. Our tail gunner, as the book refers to it, was my age. We were kids. We had turned 19 while we were overseas, and he was killed. It was probably the most traumatic experience that I had, losing him, because as the kids, we had become very, very close friends, and we were just like brothers. Thank you.
Thanks. You want to tell us what unit you were in and where you were?
That sounds good.
He's under the weather, he's really.
Hi there, I'm Ron Crum, Malin's son. He's really under the weather this evening. He's battling the cold real bad, but Dad was with the 87th Division, 87th Infantry Division, and basically he had a very short time. They saw their first action, I believe, in Metz, somewhere around the 17th of December, and went down through the Saar Basin and then up into the Bulge, and fought in the area of southwest of Bastogne, in the area of Saint-Hubert, Geneville, Tillet, and he was wounded and captured. Actually, one of those bullets they grazed the top of his head, and was captured at the time on the 3rd of January, and then spent time in 2 different camps at Bad Orb and Ziegenhain. And when he was liberated, the 80th Division liberated them on Good Friday, and he said it was a very good Friday when they were liberated. But anyhow, as I said last month, we were just over in December. It was quite an emotional time to go back. And as Renzo said, you were in the sky above, while many were on the ground, real appreciative of those planes coming. He refers often to the planes flying like crows in the prison camps when they would see the American bombers going, I guess, to Berlin at that time, probably in January, February, March. So anyhow, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a little note. Phil mentioned when he was speaking about Norman Winters. that they took quarantine. I had a rather interesting experience in quarantine in 1994. I went over 50th anniversary trip with my dad's unit, the 104th Infantry Division Timberwolves. And it happened that we stopped in quarantine for lunch. And our guide said, you know, you've got an hour, there's plenty of restaurants up and down the street here, just pick one out and go have some lunch. So myself and another couple, we walked down the street and we saw this little bistro that had a bar right out on the street and tables inside. And we walked inside and I walked up to the proprietor and you know, I said, can we have a table and have some lunch? And he does this. And we were kind of shocked because, you know, we kind of thought, at least the Timberwolves thought themselves as the liberators. And anyway, we kind of backed out and went on down the street and we came to another restaurant that was full of farmers. And those of you who haven't been to France, the way they farm over there, they live in a village, they go out and farm the fields, and then they come back at night and they come back for meals. Anyway, this little restaurant was full of farmers. And we were kind of very tentatively looking in, and the gal that owned the place gave us this motion to come on in. And she spoke very good English. In fact, she told us her daughter was married to an American GI. And we sat down and we were having some lunch, and she came over and talked. And the people in that restaurant were very cordial. You know, when they found out that this gentleman was with me, was an American GI that had helped, you know, liberate their country. And I asked her, I said, you know, why? What's the story here? And she said, well, she said, you have to understand, she said, on D-Day, Carentan was one of the main missions. And he said, you flattened this town, and you killed a lot of people. And he said, some of them still can't let it go. So that was the story of my visit to Carentan. Mr. Billings, Dr. Billings has brought some of his books along. Phil, what's the price on the book? And you've got some back here, which I take it you'll be willing to autograph for.
Price is $20 a piece, the 132, I think, a 4-page book. And I'll be happy to sign any books in the back or dedicate them to anyone you'd like them to. I can't resist. Can I just read the last paragraph of Mail and Crumbs? Here's Mail and Crumb after how many months?
3 months.
3 months. This is after several weeks now since he's been out, and they've had a chance to fatten him up, and he's home. When I finally got to Harrisburg, I called home again. They said they had a big roast in the oven. And a lot of other good food waiting. My wife, my sister-in-law, and her husband, and my daughters, Marilyn and Millie, they all jumped in our car and came after me. Outside the train station, they drove right by me twice. Finally, I stepped off the curb and waved them over. They'd all been looking for somebody younger, some guy who weighed 180 pounds, not 125. On the drive home, I didn't talk about anything that went on over there with me, and that's the way I kept it, even with my wife, for 45 years. It was just something that happened.
Thanks, Phil. With our speaker having been ill tonight and Dr. Billings filling in for us, it's kind of fouled our schedule up. But I'm hoping that we'll have our, what was to be our April speaker will be here in March. It's a lady from Carlisle. Her name is Gisela McBride. And she was a kid in Berlin from 1925 until 1945. And she's written her memoirs of this period. Her family were not Nazis, and they lived a very tenuous life. But she's written her memoirs called Memoirs of a 1,000-Year-Old Woman. And she's a very good speaker. I've heard her speak before. And I think you'll all enjoy her. And I think that'll do it. As you know, we don't have dues, and for those of you who are new, we don't pass the hat, we pass the steel pile. Thank you very much.